ELL teachers are teaching English badly or well. It's not about whether they're doing it well or not. It's these political and ideological implications of what that means. And so the pedagogy could be good or bad. I don't know. I've taught in the United States for a long time with certified teachers who like, you know, I had a coworker who would like show up, hung over to work and like take naps under her desk like during prep hour. Like, you know, like this happens with like people who are trained teachers and people who are not. So I think like the reason that puts into clarity this ELL situation where we are just saying English is the education that you need is because all of a sudden we see something different. And so I think looking at education in different contexts like makes us realize like, oh, like I said, it wouldn't even make sense to like pull our children out of school. I mean, imagine, take your own children and say like, listen, for 5 hours a day, you're gonna learn Russian over there. That's it. You're gonna do grammar. I mean, it's just like so bizarre. But we do it, and the only reason we can see it is when we start looking at different types of education that highlight how weird it is, and then you're like, oh wait, we do that too. I just have never seen it for 38 years, right?
Yeah.
Were you able to get any, I know it wasn't the focus of your research, but the parents' perspective on sending their kids to these schools, these English schools?
Right.
So, is it just the narrative that they've been fed that this is what's going to allow their kids to be successful, or?
Yeah, so my IRB was limited to teachers, but of course, like, once I got there, it became like all like complicated and muddy. Don't tell IRB, maybe that shouldn't be on because, for example, people would be like, oh, my sister's a teacher, you should come talk to her, and then I'd show up and the sister like wouldn't be a teacher, and I was like, wait, what? You know, like, so there was just, it kind of got all complicated.
Right.
But there were, you know, like,
Friendly people.
yeah, like one time I was, so, I mean, this even throws another kind of wrench in this whole English thing in terms of parents. I was asked by public school teachers who are anti-North American and anti-English if I would come give English lessons at the 4th and 5th grade classroom, just for fun. And so, you know, like, oh, okay, like, they're totally anti it, but they also, like, know that, like, technology and English is... And so I was like, yeah, sure. So I came, like, a couple times a week, and this was not part of my research because I didn't have permission to do it. But, like, we would do animals and then body parts and play Simon Says, and, you know, whatever. We would learn, hi, how are you? They would learn how to say that. So I was doing it with these 4th, 5th, and I think 6th grade classrooms. And of course, the kids are not going to walk out of there like fluent in anything. But maybe I'd walk down the street and they'd be like, "Hi, Kate. I am a shark. I am a shark." You know, things like that. So I was walking home one day, and I ran into a mother with like 2 girls, and she walked past and hola, hola, whatever. And we kept walking, and then she said, "Disculpe, you know, excuse me." And I said, "Yeah." And she was like nearly in tears, and she's like, "Are you the gringa teaching English at the elementary school?" And I said, "Yeah." And she's like, "I have talked to all the 2nd grade parents and we've all like donated $1. Like, could you come? We'll give you whatever like we have if you can come teach our 2nd graders English." And I was like, oh my God, she thinks that like this is, you know, like number one, that I'm going to be able to like teach them to be fluently English in a little bit. But number 2, like she's just desperate. I mean, she had tears in her eyes, like that her kid wasn't in one of the 4th, 5th, or 6th grade classes that I was teaching. And I was like, oh, listen, you know, it's not about money. I'm not really supposed to be doing this, whatever. But I walked away thinking like, oh my gosh, like this is the narrative everywhere. And everybody would say that. You know, the first day I go there quite a bit, so all the neighborhood kids know me. But like I got there and this girl yelled up at me like, "Ah, look, Gringa Stucky, she's going to teach me English and I'm going to get a job." Like that's what everybody was saying, and it was constant. So I didn't talk to parents or family members in an official capacity. But like these things were part of my field notes. Another thing that was happening quite a bit was, you know, I'd go to a North American school, interview all the North Americans, like walk out, and I would maybe standing waiting for a bus or something, and the moms would be like, "Oh, what are you doing here?" "Oh, I'm researching." And then I'd say like, "So why do you send your kid to the English school?" And she'd be like, "You know what, as soon as my kid learns English, I'm sending him to the United States." And they would never have said that to a North American teacher, because the idea is the North American teachers are there to get them to learn English to stay and not have to migrate. But that's what they, and I was like, oh, okay, you know, interesting. So there was a lot of kind of mixed things that North American teachers were not privy to because they didn't speak Spanish. They would have to have translators all the time. And of course, I think the parents were, I mean, they want access to that English, and so they're like, you know, like not going to say that to the North American teachers who are telling them, now your kid can stay in Honduras, they don't have to migrate. But that's what, as soon as they learn, I'm sending them to Kentucky.
And in your experience, Kate, the North American teachers, were they just kind of like funneling through? They would come and teach for 3 years, so it wasn't anybody that really was getting to know the community or wanted to immerse themselves in their lives. It was more it I'm coming to teach in Honduras for 2 years.
Yeah, or less, 3 months or 6
Oh,
months.
okay.
They take a gap year or something. I mean, I think a lot of them thought they were immersing themselves in the communities, but like once I would start to ask them, like, well, where do you live? Oh, I live in an apartment with 15 other North Americans, or like a house or whatever.
So then that's
And then I would, what do you do every night? Oh, we have a cooking schedule, you know, like, oh, do you ever hang out with Hondurans? Oh, yeah, the mom of one of my students, like, we hang out with them and she invites us over for supper. So the extent in which they were interacting was pretty limited. At the school where I was at, and I tried to avoid interviewing people from the international schools where I was at, because number one, it's like a certified school, so it's kind of a different, like, whole different level of interest, I guess. But at that school, because they do pay well, and you get flights home, and you get, you know, your housing for free and things like that. There were a number of people that had stayed because they'd married a Honduran, and so they were permanently there. And they were, you know, like, pretty knowledgeable about what's going on, but again, never really left the international school environment.
Yeah, yeah. I really liked the real clarity in the research practice connection. I don't know how to say it. Like I just felt like the connections between your research and practice are really tight and
Like
clear.
bringing it home, bringing it into
Yeah.
the classroom.
Right.
Mhm. And I was just thinking if you could speak a little more on tape about tape. Dates made us laugh. I did like the
On that
tape.
8-track player,
Yeah, great. I was thinking cassettes, but okay.
recording, I think, is the.
Yeah, recording.
I'm just kidding.
Digital. I guess I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about, like, you ground your research in those 3 works, or the 3 thinkers that you've put up. I'm wondering how you work with teachers when you're, working with them in practicums and stuff, and how you pull Freire or Mohanty.
Mohanty,
Vygotsky, I think we're all fairly familiar with. Yeah. I guess I'm not clear on my question, but I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about when you're working with practicum teachers, how that work informs your work with
Sure.
teachers.
And maybe the connection between the transnational feminism and the
Yeah.
critical pedagogy. That
Right.
was my dissertation, I don't know, 10 years ago, was Freire, and then I used a mini feminist as well. So
Uh-huh.
it was kind of, so if you could speak a little bit.
Sure. So a lot of practicum teachers, like you say, they know who Vygotsky is, but I don't know that they've read any Freire, and I'm pretty sure they've probably not read any Mohanty.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so a lot of times this doesn't come up until they're wondering what texts to teach, right, or to try, or they're worried about students talking to each other. I get all the time like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, those kids wouldn't stop talking, and I'm like, that's okay. I like that. You know how student teachers want to be completely under control, and while I'm observing, and I'm always trying to kind of say like, no, like I want to see some action, like even if they're talking about homecoming or something, like that's cool, like just go with it. So in terms of like bringing like the actual scholars in, I don't necessarily, but we do talk a lot about power, and they are pretty well versed, after going through the University of Iowa program and talking about, we do have a pretty, sociocultural bent, I think, on the undergrad teacher prep. And so they are aware of power. Whether they're able to think of ways to kind of fight back against it, that's where it gets tricky, because I think a lot of them were taught in the same way I was taught, where you're not talking to partners, you're not using outside literature, you're not talking about text, you're not humbling yourself a little bit. And that is, again, the something that I try to model with students is say like, listen, when I was teaching, I was an idiot. I was doing all these things that were like really unfair, and I look back on it, and now I'm working on it, and this will be a lifelong process. You don't graduate as a fully formed teacher. This is going to be like a lifelong process of you challenging yourself and feeling bad, and sometimes crying about it, and then like waking up the next day, and then like figuring out a way to do it better. So that doesn't directly relate to those theories, but it has informed the way I think about my own teaching and the way that I've been able to grapple with, or, have you ever like taught something and then like 3 years later you're like, dang, like that was so irresponsible, like I'm just a
What was I
mess.
doing?
And I think we're trained to be like, no, I didn't make any mistakes. Like that was a perfect classroom. Those kids did not talk. I'm so sorry they talked. Like to just like keep apologizing for it. And so learning how to like throw it out there so we can deal with it being able to humble yourself and like deal with those power dynamics. Like you are in a privileged position as the teacher in the classroom. Whatever your background is, you have like some sort of degree, well, in the United States, right? Which may be taking away, moving away from even teaching degrees. But thinking about how to kind of not level the playing field, but delegate some of the power, or again, I'm not really quite sure what the word is, but that's something I'm always talking with teachers about. Even in their teacher logs, they have to write to me every week. They're always like, oh, I just felt like I lost control of the classroom, and I'm always like interested in that word control. Like, okay, like why do you feel like you need to control them? Let's talk about that. So having open conversations, I think, is how that comes out.
Okay. Thank you.
That plays in a lot with what we try to do with the teachers all year long. Val and I run something called the Literacy Consortium, which is in its 11th year. We work with different districts, and we usually have between 11 and 20 districts. We've kind of downsized because we feel like we can do better work with 11, but the focus the last 2 years has been on student-centered learning, and PBLs with students taking charge of it, and teachers still have such, like if they're not in control,
Like every second.
is learning happening?
Yeah.
So how do you understand learning by listening to kids?
Right.
And we don't do such a good job teaching our students. Our
Yeah, that was
resource
interesting. It was
teachers
like
that.
hard for them when we were like, well, the idea should come from the students. And they still
these are
wanted to say,
veteran
well, what if
teachers,
we
yeah.
just like put a couple choices out and then they can pick for, well, but still those ideas didn't come from there. And how would you find out what matters to kids?
If you don't ask them.
Right.
And then how do you value what they say?
Yeah, because they may
Because a
say
couple of
something
them-
you don't think is important to investigate, but they want to investigate.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
So the tension's there.
A colleague of mine runs an adult English language tutoring thing or whatever, and so she's always trying to be like Freudian with this, right? Like she gets like 20 mostly Latino adults, and she's always like, what do you guys want to learn? Like, do you want to learn like how to talk to a doctor? At a doctor's office, what languages do you want to learn? And they're all often like, we want to do grammar worksheets.
That's Catherine.
Do the same thing.
I'm struggling with this
Oh my
so
God, I'm gonna put you in touch with
much.
her. And so she's always like, okay, they're telling me they want that, and I'm trying to be Freudian by taking what they want and doing it, but I don't think, and then she has to like figure out, okay,
Right.
well,
I think too, Susan and I do this with adult literacy, I think they don't know what they don't know, or they don't know
What the possibilities
what the
are.
possibilities are.
Yeah, so I don't know if this is a fair or realistic question, but I'm gonna ask it anyway.
that's fine.
So when you think about teachers, like that Midge and Val work with, when you think about our students, graduate and undergraduate, not so much our PhD students, and you think about adult learners, so how do you approach negotiating their understandings of literacy learning that's more grounded in either standards or just real practical applications, or getting a job for our students when we're thinking about this in a much more ideological and political kind of way?
Right.
I mean, because we're coming in there like, okay,
Yeah, they're like, this is not
but
applicable.
a graphic novel is just a comic. Why are we reading? That kind of, So
Or if I want to advocate something and I don't even have the job yet.
Yeah,
like,
right,
Or
yeah.
I'm a first-year teacher and I've got to negotiate keeping my job and
Yes,
Right.
right.
teaching.
Yeah, and just to layer that, when we're thinking about it, how do we teach? We teach our pre-service teachers to be political and think in ideological terms. Then they go to a school
Right.
and teach curriculum.
Lots
So
of
how,
that, yeah.
yeah. So the culture at school is diametrically opposed.
everything's
Right.
bumping up against
Right,
what we're
right.
saying
Right.
in the university
So that
classroom.
doesn't
right?
happen in these schools,
Yeah,
yeah, so.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that is interesting is that in the United States we don't have a lot of examples of political teachers, and I mentioned the Chicago
Yeah, you're right.
teachers.
Mhm.
I think that's intentional, and I think that over decades, like I said, teachers have been deprofessionalized, unions have been like dangerous,
Yeah.
organizing, like
Mhm.
they're fascists and they're communists, and
Right.
I mean, even when I say to my parents, like, oh yeah, I'm a Marxist, then it's like, oh my God, like, what does that mean? Like, you want to kill babies or whatever. And, like, it's an economic system, Mom. It's not about eating children, whatever.
Yeah, you know what the comedy show.
But anyway, we don't have a lot of models in the United States for what an activist teacher looks like. There are models, but they're like highly dangerous and like striking teachers in Chicago,
Well, they
or like
are.
canceling school.
In Arizona, that
Yeah.
was the whole La Raza program.